sold. I love again, the environment of Port Dover. We moved from a city to get away from it. Now they're building Milton in my backyard. And if I wanted to move to Milton, I would have moved there. Mr. Egging, I think, has many subdivisions in Milton as well. And I know the division is going to go forward, but I think don't try to make it seem like it's only this parcel of land. I think, like I said, we need to all keep in mind that, no, there certainly are plans for it to go all the way out to the Cockshut. And my concerns are, again, I put those signs in. Traffic is a concern. It's not just a retirement community. There certainly are families. There are several people here that there are kids all through this area already. Traffic is already a concern. So the number of dwellings that are planning to be put into just this part alone at 187 also mentions that there'll be lots of room for rentals within that. So that means the people that are in there are upwards of 300 plus people. That's 300 and a half cars that would be in there. There's a lot of traffic concerns. The park is a big concern for us as well. I also immediately was drawn to the notation that they were not planning to build it to or have the park area be at the scale that it's supposed to be. I also am wondering why on that it should be there, especially since my heart is crying for all the trees that have just been ripped down to the other side of Dover Mills to build more egg Inc. homes. Without sparing nary a tree for anyone that already lives there in the homes that have already been established. That's a concern because as someone who's living in a heritage home on Prospect, backing onto the property, I mean, all the trees have been taken from the owners there before, but just the respect for the properties that are already there and the nature that is there, it is of utmost importance. You know, I also would want to see the full parkette land or parkland happening in this subdivision. My kids personally have requested that a basketball court or shooting hoop be put in that parkland there. You know, and it seems to me too, I've met all along Prospect, there's a whole lot of puppy owners this spring. A good dog park would be good in Port Dover. I know people go to Silver Lake where it's not a dog park and they're being ticketed, as people should. It's not a proper space. So if they're building this whole inclusive division, I think that's something that also they might take into consideration for putting in that park space, which again I feel should be the full park space that's there. I think I'd probably, again, the traffic, like everyone is going to come out. Prospect is a really busy street. That's why I grabbed those signs from my old counselor, like I said, from my old area in Toronto and brought them down. I took the last few that she had. And I think it is a big concern that all the traffic is going to, that's where we go. For grocery shopping, that's where everyone goes. I tend to work out of town, so I often go up Dover Mills. I often go through Tisdale. And if you start magnifying the volume of people, not just for this subject land that we're talking about today, because let's be real, that is going to be, again, on those other lots. So that's probably another 1,000 people going in there. And the population of Port Dover is somewhere in the 7,000, I think, range. It's a lot of people. So I think we do really need to take into consideration the traffic, the flooding. It's a lot. I just would like to see, make sure that the parkland is protected and serious consideration is taken to all the traffic issues that are going to happen and the safety concerns there.
Thank you. Are there questions for the presenter?
Okay.
Councillor Brunton and Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, and thank you for your...
Okay. Yeah.
Just a question for you. You and your husband live on Prospect?
Yes, we do.
And do you work in Dover, or do you live
No, I work at the courthouses in Simcoe and Cayuga.
Okay, and can I ask you a question? You have two
Yep.
cars?
We have 2 cars.
And you go out in the morning and come back at night?
Yeah, I work part-time, so whenever the court has family court running is when I go, so it's not every day. The days I'm not working, I'm shuttling kids to baseball and going to the grocery store, the regular things that a family does, and then that's in town.
So that's more like 2 or 3 times a day, easily?
That I'm out in the car? No, I try to pack everything into one. If I'm making a trip to Simcoe for something, I try to only make a trip for one thing, and same if I'm going to town. If I have to hit the vet's office and I try to do it all in one loop. Because I walk too. I don't want to be out.
And your husband works out of town?
Yes.
You have a car? He has a car?
Yep.
He leaves in the morning, comes back at night, or does
He
come
leaves
back at
before
noon?
almost any of you are probably up in the morning.
Comes back at night,
Yeah.
but not at noon.
No.
So that's maybe 4 or 5 cars in a day that you go out with, right? You and your husband?
No. No, it's maybe 2 cars that are going out and the same 2 cars coming back. Oh, I guess 4, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The thing of your presentation that caught my attention, you're talking about inadequate parkland dedication. Where have you been told that that is the case? I mean, as I went through the report, it talks about the parkland dedication and
Yep.
community services is supportive of the identified land for parkland, and the developer's
Yeah.
talking about possibly donating the woodlot at the north end of the property to the county. So
Yeah.
where have you read or been told that the parkland dedication is inadequate?
No, I believe in the paperwork as well, it talks about like, one, all that dedication of the, that's possible, that's not for sure, so we know that. But say that parkette area that shows the drainage area and everything.
Adjacent to the
Yeah,
stormwater level, yeah.
that is supposed to be, I believe, what they're saying is to be developed, to have like playground, equipped playground space. But it also says in there that the space doesn't have to be like in lieu. The other speaker spoke to that, cash in lieu, that they don't have to have the full size. That's what I'm also reiterating what that speaker said, like, yeah, it does need to be the full size.
all right.
I mean, yeah, that's,
So it's not inadequate, you're just concerned that there could be decisions made down the road to reduce the amount of parkland and give us money instead.
oh,
Is that
yeah,
what
so
you're
maybe,
concerned
I
about?
wasn't clear on the park, so I'm talking about that parkette space where they're saying like in cash in lieu that they don't have to have the full space that should be there, and it should be there,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's the county's call. so
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Anything further? Thank you very much.
Dr. Stephen Malte, resident of 88 Dover Mills Road.
88 Dover Mills.
Yeah, right on that corner
Thank
of
you.
where the first subject lands are being developed, actually, just to the left of my driveway. Multiple concerns. First concern relates to what the gentleman talked about for traffic in terms of the volume of cars. If you go by the numbers that you were trying to tease out of her just a few minutes ago, you're looking at 1,200 or more car trips a day, or depending on how many cars are owned within this one area of a subdivision, that's well over 1,000 car trips a day, people walking, kids, et cetera. Kids bike on there to go to school all the time, people walk by there. So the safety concern in terms of, okay, the one thing you have to keep in mind that I wanted to start with before I started this is this is a subdivision, if it goes all the way to Cockshut, that's going to last anywhere from 12 to 25 years. So some of you will not even be alive that are in this room when this is done. So you need to consider highly everything from parks to public safety to roads to traffic lights to all the different things that have been discussed today. And I think that based upon just discussing one parcel of land, we can't just discuss one parcel of land in terms of planning for safety and roads and all those things. And one of the things of being a public servant from the province of Ontario, or even within the county, is that we're supposed to have the public safety first. So I think that needs to be addressed further, and then parks and all that stuff is a huge other issue. My concerns are basically the disruption to the road. I'm probably the only person on Dover Mills Road that has a business where I have a parking lot, or people come to my house and I have clients. I'm a naturopathic doctor. So one of my concerns is whether people are going to be able to get to me, because my wife doesn't work full-time. She works like 1 hour a day at the school. So if this is suddenly becoming, the roads are going to have to get changed, there's going to have to be construction on the roads to create sidewalks, et cetera. My one concern regarding all this, which is going to happen within the next few years, over your 6 phases, I think I heard, is whether people are going to be able to get to me at 88 Dover Mills Road, if that can be taken into account while this is being made. That's my concern personally. The other concern is safety, walking, my daughter riding her bike, all those different things going on that road. The other thing is the drainage behind me, the parcel of land that's in green across from this to the right, has all been clear cut, which was, my daughter cried. We used to call it the 100-acre woods, and then when they put the last subdivision in, called it the 25-acre woods. Now all she does is cry when she goes back there. So there's going to be a lot of stuff changing across the road, and that even though it's just one person just being sad from these things, I think the developers need to understand that when they go in and build a bunch of homes and change a community, they don't just change by building houses, they change the way people live, the amount of, from a doctor's point of view, the amount of dust and the amount of wood chips and the amount of different things that come in. There'll be respiratory problems from people living within this area just over the time with the amount of houses being developed in this area, because there's probably going to be hundreds and hundreds, 500 or more houses developed in this area. So the biggest concern for me is the roads, whether I'm going to be able to have people access me when this road gets ripped apart, Dover Mills gets ripped apart, to put in the ability to do this. The concern with the drainage behind me, I mean, I can have 20 feet of water easily behind me. John Wells has come to my house a number of times and looked at the back and said how much it used to flood before, and then they put the drainage in behind us for the area. And it seems like right now, when they clear cut the area behind me, they basically wiped out the swamp, and maybe the 4-inch pipe will work. I have other patients who are retired from various fields who do not think that the 4-inch pipe will work for draining the area, so that maybe needs to be considered now, because that subdivision isn't going to have the development to drain the water that's going to go behind us before the water comes in the fall in a number of weeks. So my concerns are the water behind me relative to that subdivision not being developed yet. I was told a long time ago that they were going to try to develop them at the same time. So concerns are for the roads, access to my business, safety of all the community within there, the number of houses that are going to be developed over the next 25 years in the area needs to be firmly looked at and thought ahead, and multiple access points, and maybe skip the whole access to Prospect Road because it's a dangerous road even to access within that area. That road can be brutal in the winter if there's snow on it going up the hill. So I think there needs to be a lot more thought in terms of where the roads come out, and to have 200, 300, 400 cars coming out to one spot or even two spots within there, and then the more that's going to go in there where you're up to 500 to 1,000 cars going in that tiny little spot, I think there needs to be some maybe, I can see the other roads coming to Dover Mills, but still, like, that's not going to happen for this parcel of land that's going to have all those houses. So my concerns are whether people are going to be able to be safe walking on there, how that's going to disrupt everything, and just the drainage. And again, the parkette too, like, there is no park on that entire map I live in. I've walked through all that area. Other than the Sunning Hill way off to the right, you can see a tiny little bit of it. There is no real green space in that entire area that's actually usable, other than if you want to, like, hang out with flies or near the edge of water. And some of those places aren't even cut. They don't even cut the grass near them, depending on the year. So there's no green space with all the subdivisions that have been done within there since I've lived here since 2008. So green space is not the same as park space, and park space, I'm just surprised it's such a huge area. There's almost no parks in that entire side of Port Dover. There's nothing. And it's just, it blows my mind when I walk through all these areas and all it is it's Mississauga, Mississauga, Mississauga. It totally looks like Mississauga where we used to live before we came here. It's all it looks like. All the houses look the same. My wife laughs that, we should just move back to Toronto. So my concern are for the roads, just to summarize, my concerns are for the road safety, for the development of Dover Mills Road to have sidewalks and how that's going to affect me, and for the parks that should be built in, and also the water drainage. And I think some of that needs to be looked at rather than just a 4-inch pipe and like, yeah, we're going to have parks and don't worry about it. And I have more concerns too, but I didn't want to cause any more problems because I had other thoughts too. And because I like Charlie and John, I didn't want to ruffle too many feathers. Anyway, thank you very much for the chance to speak, and I hope
pleasure.
some of my points at least were summarized by the minutes that will actually be addressed in your future meetings. I think the big thing you need to do is, over the time, is all of you need to, when you kick us all out and discuss this, you need to really hammer out some of these points, because if we're coming here, that means there's 100 more people that have these concerns that are too shy or too quiet to come here and speak, or too afraid to come here and speak because of the concerns of ruffling the feathers of you, Mr. Agink, etc. And as my father-in-law would say, Mr. Agink's a very fair man.
Thank you very much. Any questions for this gentleman? Thank you. Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition or in general to this? You go ahead, and then go ahead, then I'll get you next. Sorry.
I'm in opposition too.
I'm sorry?
Opposition.
You're in
I
the right
oppose
spot
it.
then, and your name?
Lisa and Amy, A-N-E-M-I.
And Amy.
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't live on Prospect, but I visit Prospect. So part of my daily routine is walking up Prospect to visit my sister. And the part of the joy is that the street is a nice, windy, curvy, yes, street. But it's also very dangerous, that road. And where the proposed entrance is for the street, it is where there's if you look directly across, you have a very small clearance and you have trees everywhere. I personally believe, coming from Oakville, moving out here 2 years ago, we're starting to do a cookie cutter environment here as well. And if we were to take those 2-3 lots that are available where you're proposing to put a road, put beautiful, grand homes there, you'll get somebody buying them, make the streetscape remain a beautiful, historic-looking streetscape. By doing that, you're impacting the value of all the people that live on Prospect, and that's just not fair. It's just not fair. As far as the parkette, I did look at the first map, map number 4, where they had the parkette and the stormwater, the pond, in 2 separate locations. In this map, map 6, it appears that they're together now. So, as a mother, having a storm pond next to a parkette, a proposed parkette, if they don't take the cash in lieu of, it says it right in there, I read it, so I know it's there. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you have a stormwater pond and then have a parkette? It just doesn't go, okay? Port Dover is beautiful because it is quaint. And what we're trying to do now is we're just trying to replicate what we currently already have. Why replicate what we have in Milton, Mississauga, Oakville, Brampton, Georgetown? We don't want that here. The people that are moving into Port Dover and are bringing lots of money into Port Dover are coming from other locations. And what they're looking for is beautiful homes with nice lots, green space around them, and the ability to go walk and feel safe. You're going to have 500 houses in that area, I think up to 1,000 projected, coming from initially Prospect, then Tisdale, then the Cockshut, and Dover Mills. Why not do it right the first time? Pay me now or pay me later. Eventually, someone's going to have to pay this bill. So it has to be done. Do it right. And you know, they say quality is doing the job right even when somebody's not looking. Okay? So let's do it right. You know, I'm sure they know what they're doing. Their houses are beautiful. They're amazing homes. Just, you know, do we need to put more townhouses there? It looks terrible in front of that castle. You've destroyed that beautiful historic home with that street that's tight. You know, it just looks terrible. It really, even to get into that, you know, it's a nice shortcut, but it looks like crap. I'm sorry. It just looks like crap. And whoever approved it should get their head checked because it looks like garbage. So I'm speaking my mind, George. John, you did? You? It was you? Okay. You know, and I'm tired of seeing shortcuts being done in this town. I've seen a lot of shortcuts being done with the Main Street. We've had vendors that are suffering on Main Street because we're not doing things proper. We're not thinking, you know, forward. We're like, we got to get the road fixed. Yeah, let's do it. And then you got all these vendors on Main Street that are suffering. You know, so we have one gentleman here, he's trying to support his family from his house. He's running a business there. If you start building and you start blocking the streets and you don't have proper grease that people can drive in and out, you're going to have problems and people are going to suffer. So that's just my opinion, and I just wanted on the record that I am completely opposed to having an entrance from Prospect from day one.
Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
And his houses are beautiful, so nothing against the houses.
Thank you for your patience.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Diana Heckman. I live on 112 Prospect Street. Unfortunately, the laneway going from the subdivision is right beside my home. Sorry. But anyways, just for me to come into my driveway from Prospect going past Claw Mill, it is so dangerous. It is incredibly. Every time I'm just like waiting, just scared out of my mitts because how people drive on that street, same thing as Heather said before, it is dangerous. People don't slow down. They drive like maniacs. And, you know, I'm the one that's going to be probably, you know, living the worst part of the whole new development because my house is 112, right smack beside that entrance. And anyways, I just want to point it out that it is a very dangerous street and something does have to be kind of rectified about that. So anyways, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Diana. Any questions? Thank you. No, the questions are from council. Sorry. Diana, you can have a seat, please. Thank you. Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition?
Good evening, James Grant.
James, go ahead.
I have this nice little booklet that says Norfolk County, Ontario's Garden. It's beautiful. We're losing that at great rate, and Dover especially is losing at a tremendous rate. Many of the speakers have spoken before about the many other issues, but do we really need to come here right now when, I know it's in the plan, it'll happen, it will. But you got a lot of problems up there. And we've got all kinds of land that's already been approved for development. John over here still got tons of houses to go up. I think we should finish what we've started before we get going on problem areas. That's my opinion on that. You have got drainage issues, tremendous traffic problems up there. Go ahead. What's going to happen up in Clonmel with the condos there? It's going to be crazy. His phone, he will want to retire, I'm sure. John. And drainage is a problem up there, and all that water isn't necessarily coming, like that ditch that's behind the homes on Dover Mills and Prospect. When it rains, it's not that full. A lot of that is coming off of Prospect already and down, and then across under the road and back into these backyards on Dover Mills South. So if you take all that stuff into consideration, I don't think we should be having another meeting about this for several years until you sort out everything else. That's just my opinion, and just to top it off, I think it's kind of ignorant, sorry sir, or Mr. Valley, that the lower end, the townhomes, are behind the existing homes. Just to top it off, it's kind of like insult to injury.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in general or in opposition to this application? You've had yours, I'm sorry, but we don't get into a debate amongst the crowd. Council gets to speak more than once, and the developer gets the last word. That is our procedure under the Planning Act. I saw another hand here. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Helen Thoburn,
Helen?
and I live at 142 Dover Mills. And I don't have any eloquent points to make because they were already made by other property owners in the area. But I just wanted to echo the concern for traffic and safety, even on Dover Mills. That's a very fast road, and I have young children as well. I'm concerned with the number of houses that will be built, the number of cars that will be on that road and on Prospect. So I just really want the traffic patterns to be studied carefully. And unfortunately, I just want to add too, I was very unhappy with the way the trees were cut down in this matter of a couple of days. And like Dr. Maltas, my child cried too, and he still is crying as well. So I just want that to be considered in the future, that this is important to the community, what is done. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Any questions for this lady? Thank you, Helen. Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition or in general to this application? Is there anything further from council? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to ask our planners what the possibility would be, being that we're in the official plan process, to have Mr. Lawrence's property, he's talking about some portion of that, to be brought into the urban boundary. He's got a small acreage in the urban boundary, but if that could be extended, what's the possibility of that happening in the next 6 months or so?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the additional lands or boundary expansions, those were evaluated through the housing and residential reports that were brought forward as part of the official plan review. And through that, the changes were set And also, as part of that, council has approved the document in principle, and that has been forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for their review. So at this time, it's at that stage. So once it comes back from the ministry, it'll be brought forward with any changes that they have had. I'm not exactly sure in terms of the procedure at this point because it has been adopted by council in terms of the principles and it's gone to the ministry. So at this time, I think that ship has essentially sailed in terms of inclusions at this point, but we can look into that and provide a more clear answer for you.
Well, I think it would be a wise move if we could look into it. I don't think it would hurt.
Thank you, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to staff, I'm looking at this map up here, and obviously there's the color grids of high density, medium density, and that couldn't have been drawn by the developer because he doesn't own that land. So is this something that our staff put forward, and this is what their plan is?
Through the chair, the plan that you see up there was, other than the road stub, the densities were indicated by the developer. So as mentioned earlier, there are 3 separate parcels, well 4, but 3 large parcels all in separate ownership, but they all comprise of the secondary area for North Dover Mills. And so that is the purpose of this application, that we need to look at these lands as a whole to ensure that they are developed in a comprehensive and sustainable manner. So the developer has indicated that there will be different densities, singles, semis, townhouses, and they've shown that on the mapping. It is not to say that those will be the exact areas, and that will come in future applications.
I'm confused. I'm talking about the corner there in dark green of the map that says high density, that is not on the developer's application here. Is that what you're talking about? Because that's not on his application.
Through the chair, yes, that did come from the developer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of the concepts and the densities that are proposed on here, it's not included on the specific subject application in terms of the proponent's lands. However, as part of the information that they provided with the application and the justifications, reports, and some of their functional servicing information, it was included as part of the larger scheme to help satisfy the policies of the secondary plan. So although it's not specific to their property, it was put forward as part of the overall review of the lands.
So someone can come in and do a review and tell you what they want on your land? Because that's how I read this here. High density goes into that corner. Well, that person's not interested in developing, and at the very least is not interested in developing high density land. I don't know how that even joins the picture when you trample people's property rights. They don't own it. There's no justification in that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this time, because it is part of the neighborhood secondary plan, it's the conceptual ideas of to show how a mix of densities can proceed in terms of the overall. And I believe Ms. Robinson would like to add some additional commentary on this matter.
Through the mayor to council, just to see if I can sort of assist to some extent. Our official plan requires an area, a secondary plan for this larger area. There's give or take 4 different property owners within that larger area. That's one of the requirements. The purpose of the application here this evening is basically to remove this area from the requirement to have a secondary plan. That's sort of the decision that's being put forward in front of you. The report that staff have put forward says staff are not objecting to that taking place, provided a certain number of conditions are being met. Those are some of the conditions that you see in this staff report this evening. In order to look at sort of forward-thinking things like, how is this entire area, while we recognize that this developer won't necessarily be the one developing this larger area, we want to make sure that the appropriate consideration is given so that we don't end up with 16 different small stormwater management ponds all over the place. And as council is well aware, those cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean out on an annual basis. We want a regional pond. We want to make sure that we don't end up with sewage pumping stations all over the place, all over this whole area. We want to make sure that the storm infrastructure is all sized appropriately. In order to do that, when they're looking at these things, they have to take into consideration some of the densities. So typically what you see in these sorts of things is you typically push some of the densities to the worst case scenario so that when you're doing some of this preliminary work, you have an idea. So in this particular case, they're pushing some of the high density. This isn't meaning that's where it's going to go, but it's the worst case so that when we're considering it as part of a secondary plan, that we actually look at the worst case to make sure that that's not what's going to happen. This application isn't to approve all of those things there. Those are assumptions, I'm going to call it an assumption that the developer is making in order to assist them so that they look at the worst possible case scenario when they're moving forward with this. So nobody, by approving this application, nobody's saying that this is going to be there. These are their general assumptions that they used as background for some of the studies that they put forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Black.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. And this whole idea of a secondary plan is coming a little bit clearer to me because I always thought that the secondary plan was something like, a downtown secondary plan or a lakeshore secondary plan, but now we're using it for kind of consolidating properties that are in multiple ownerships. And I guess I can understand that, but it just adds to the confusion of the public of like, what are we doing here? Just through you to staff, is that sort of a good summary of my understanding of the secondary plan and why you're using them in these cases?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. In terms of a secondary plan or neighborhood community plans, it is to look at the general development as a whole so that when we're looking at the 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, that we're looking at a property and we're looking at an area comprehensively so that you're not having the piecemeal developments, that you're not running into the potential for future issues in terms of road connections, that the properties are being developed in the area is being developed in a logical and methodical way to address all the concerns that have been raised here by the residents, including your traffic, your parklands, your servicing. So it is an extra step in the planning process. It's not one that you do typically see. As been noted for the Port Dover area, we have 2 such areas that would fit this bill. And it does add an extra step in terms of the planning process, but it is an important step as well because we do get to see and understand a lot of the issues that come through the process.
So it's good for the community because it's taking into consideration broader issues. So it's good in that way, but maybe not so good for the developer because he's got to go through another step. But I guess there's a balance and a compromise there. But why is Norfolk County paying for one area and not the other?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the Port Dover West request for proposal, as Mr. Valley alluded to or mentioned earlier in his presentation, that was a budgeted item in council through previous deliberations of council in terms of a go forward for the Port Dover West planning area. There are a few different distinctions in terms of the Port Dover West area versus North Dover Mills. It's acknowledged that the I'll try to keep this straight as I talk. The North Dover Mills one has essentially 3 major property owners and a 4th smaller portion of lands which play into effect. In terms of the overall, the Port Dover West has multiple properties. There's quite a few interests in play, and it is known that there are additional factors. There's additional road connections that have to be taken into consideration as part of the development. There are potential for servicing issues. There's environmental aspects and topography issues. There's Ministry of Transportation acknowledgements with the fact that it is located on Highway 6. So there is a multitude of issues that are also at play in terms of the Port Dover West plan area, that you're not going to see the same number of factors or the same degree of factors in terms of North Dover Mills. The North Dover Mills wasn't on the planning horizon in terms of the request for proposal, whereas the Port Dover Mills, Port Dover West was included in terms of the budget deliberations, and monies have been set aside to address that as per council's direction through that process. I know that in terms of the overall, we have had inquiries and different matters come up to planning in terms of Port Dover West as well. However, those have always kind of fallen back because there are so many landowners and issues in turn that proponents have not followed through in terms of advancing further through the inquiry stage.
Okay, and just one of the deputations, James, asked about the location of some of the townhouses. Like how does a developer or the county planning determine the location of specific types of housing? And understand his point. It's like sort of single family backing on single family, and townhouses may be located someplace else. Will that issue be looked at further on down the road?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, those items would be evaluated and reviewed in further detail at the draft plan of subdivision stage. In terms of the go forward, we would want to make sure that there's an appropriate mix of development and housing forms within a proposal, but that is something through that process that can be reviewed so that you're not having varying land uses backing onto each other in the established.
Would the public have further input into that?
I'm sorry?
Would the public have further input into that?
Yes, absolutely. As part of the draft plan of subdivision and the zoning application process, those are both public processes. So as soon as an application is received, a complete application is received, public notice would be circulated that that complete application has been received. And at that time, the more detailed lotting pattern would be available, and that would be circulated. And then when it would also come forward to council in terms of a public meeting similar to this, wherein additional impacts or comments could be provided.
Okay, so further public opportunities, and thank you for that. And I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, if this is a question for planning or public works, but you know, I do know we've talked about the Clonmel and the traffic patterns, and later on there will be some reports on that, and I'm sure it would include Clonmel. But wondering if staff have ever considered the idea of dead-ending Clonmel, either in the middle or at one end or the other, so it would not permit through traffic.
Well, I'm not sure, Councillor Black, if that is relevant to this 38-acre parcel that we have in front of us tonight. Clonmel is there. It's there. It exists. It's legal. So I'm not just too sure of putting a wall through the middle of that roadway to separate the north and south end of that development is really related to this. I recognize the concerns of the public.
Well,
Drainage
Mr. Mayor,
and traffic, et cetera, are all tied in. I get that. Lee, do you wish to comment on whether we should be going back to Clonmel and redoing the road configuration there?
You know, if you don't think it's appropriate, it's just...
Well, you know what? It's all related. It's all related. I'm not...
Yeah.
No, I'm just...
Staff might, you know, think about it, that idea, and
that's fair.
they could come back with it later. Just
I have anything else? Sorry.
Nope, that's it.
Thank you, sir. I have two more speakers here. I am going to try to bring this public meeting somewhat to an end. We have a 9 o'clock curfew. And again, it's all good discussion. It's all very, very important. Absolutely. So I don't want to give you that impression. I will entertain as many speakers as necessary, and so certainly the last part of this will give the applicant or the agent a chance, if they wish, to respond to a number of concerns that were raised. Anyhow, certainly I'll continue as long as you have questions. That's what I'm here for. But Councillor Oliver first, please, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and keep this short.
Fine.
We know that transportation and busyness on Prospect and Dover Mills has been a big issue for these people, and I think as much as anything, it's been an issue in the bigger picture context of the
Yes.
other lands. So my simple question to staff, Mr. Mayor, not sure whether Public Works or Planning would choose to answer it. The plans we've been shown show 2 road stubs terminating on the east side of the subject lands.
Yes.
My question to staff is, before any of the remaining balance lands to the east would be allowed to be developed, is it staff's opinion probably that we would insist on road access going further to the east out towards Cockshut? In other words, would any more land than what's the subject of this discussion tonight be allowed to be developed to the east without having this connector out towards Cockshut?
Lee?
Through the mayor to council, I think I understand your question, so bear with me if I put some words in your mouth to make sure that I understand. I think what the question that you're asking is that could this particular piece of property, Mr. Egging's property, be developed without a connection out to the Cockshut, yet the next piece of property moving in the easterly direction would require the connection to the Cockshut before it would be allowed to go forward?
That's essentially what I'm asking.
Okay. Through the mayor to council, I'm hesitant to answer that question at this time. Although we're seeing preliminary road designs here, we're really not at the draft plan of subdivision yet, so it hasn't been determined. There will be a threshold number of houses that will be permitted to go forward before that connection to the Cockshut will be required. The studies as part of this draft plan approval of subdivision will give us those numbers. It's entirely possible that that requirement may be 50% of the way through the next property to the east, or it could be this particular piece of property. Until those more detailed studies are done, I don't know exactly when the connection to the Cockshut will be required. We will, through this process, determine that number, and that number will be determined. I just don't know exactly where that tipping point is at this point, but there will come a time where no more development can take place until that connection is built.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Councillor Brunton?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I see in Mr. Valley's request, there's 3 items, but, and I do have a few questions for him if he ever gets back onto the podium. But, the problem here is, any development, is that nobody wants to be first to spend the big bucks. I heard Mr. Valley speak that if the property is closer to the Cockshut developed, they might need a trunk sanitary down the Cockshut. We talked about that briefly, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. When you have multiple properties, the only way somebody gets to move, now he did say his property, Mr. Eggix, can develop. He said their sanitary storm can be looked after, but you have 3 other pieces of property. Secondary plans are great. They tell you where you're going to go. The thing is, let's ask Mr. Valley to do the secondary plan, but let's pay him to do it from our coffers, and then prorate the cost of that study back per acre on those other 3 owners. That's like a front-ending agreement with those 3 owners. It's time this county got into that type of thinking, because we have never, ever, and I know nobody wants to do it, but we need to have front-ending agreements where people can move ahead, because if we don't, a lot of these developments are going to come to a standstill. And it's not hard to do. It's not hard to do. And this is a prime example. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
We are still in the question period of this public meeting. The debate is a long ways away yet, I'm afraid. And that time we'll be able to debate this. Does the applicant or agent wish to respond to any of the concerns raised? Mr. Valley, please.
Councillor Luke, or Mayor Luke, I'm sorry. Sorry for that.
Anything you like.
All you have to do is ask Councillor Wells and he'll tell you that I'd love to respond. Okay, a couple of responses here to some of the things that were said. But before I do that, I think we really need to keep focused on what we're talking about here. We're talking about a secondary plan. And I put that slide up that had all the arrows down going to next step, next step, next step, next step. We're at the very, very, very top of that secondary plan. You guys don't even normally see me until we get to step 2. But we're having a hard time getting out of step 1 here. So yes, this drawing with these densities and this road pattern going on all these other people's land, yes, that is produced by this developer. Why? Because that's a secondary plan, and that's what he has to do, and he has to pay for in order to get this thing approved so he can get to a draft plan. Are we saying what's going to happen on other people's lands? Sure we are. And Leah Robinson gave exactly the right answer. We need to know how many houses are going to be built on all these adjacent lands so we can do calculations for sanitary sewer services and all that kind of stuff. So we come up with an idea of what this could look like. Where do we put the high-density land? We put it by the Cockshut. Why? Because it's a big road with big capacity, and higher-density land should be located in those areas, that kind of thing. It's a secondary plan. We're not here tonight to talk about drainage and traffic and all those kinds of things, but I'm going to respond to them anyway because they've been asked. But that's not what we're here. This land is earmarked in your Norfolk County official plan that it will be used for urban residential development. That decision was made way before any of us sat around this table. And then it's always been designated that way. We're implementing your Norfolk County official plan by bringing the secondary plan forward. Are there studies and things to do? Of course there are. That's what will all be set out in your draft plan application, which we'll be really happy to bring with you once you give us an approval on the secondary plan. Okay, so we have to keep our mindset as to what we're talking about. Okay, a few key things. Mr. Lawrence came up, and there's been this talk about we could punch a road from Mr. Egging's land across Mr. Lawrence's land and get over to Tisdale and alleviate all this traffic, and we're going to expand the urban boundary, and we're going to solve that problem. He said he's going to bring 15 acres more in. This is great. And there was a question went over to planning about can that happen? I didn't really understand that answer other than we've sent a report to the ministry, and we don't have an answer. But what I can tell you from my experience, when you go to make an application to expand the urban boundary in Norfolk County, this is the test. Population study. How many more people are going to be in Norfolk County 20 years from now? How many more people than what we have today? So many thousand. How many houses do they need? Divide by 2.5 people per house. How many households do we now need? We have density targets, so many houses per acre. That tells us how many acres of land or hectares of land we need. This is simple. Then we look Norfolk County wide. How many acres of residentially designated land does Norfolk County have? Doesn't matter if it's in Dover or Waterford or Delhi. How much do you have total? Do you have enough for a 20-year supply? Yes. No more expansions. It's that simple. Let's look at Dover alone. Mr. Lennox is sitting over here. He's got 1,000 units of land, I don't know a number, about 1,000 units, I'm going to guess, of residentially designated land. This property is already residentially designated, another 1,000 units there. Dover West that we talked about earlier, secondary plan, another 1,000 units of residentially designated land. There's 3,000-ish units of residentially designated land at 2.5 people per house. Do the math, is 7,000 something people. Capacity in Port Dover, double the size of Port Dover. That's the capacity ballpark that you have today. What are the chances that you're going to be able to justify adding 15 more acres of land to Mr. Lawrence and move his boundary? It's slim. It's really slim. We went through this. You'll remember, we went through this in Waterford for Tony Yin, and it was a huge uphill battle, despite the fact that there was virtually no more land in Waterford. But we went through that battle, and it was ugly. But we're in Port Dover. and there's thousands of units of capacity available there. So my point is, this idea of moving the urban boundary north on Mr. Lawrence's land so that we can create this road out to Tisdale is a long way away. I believe it's a long way away. Your planners may have some other idea. There's talked about Dover Mills Road and the capacities and so on. Ms. Robinson and her group have already made it clear to us that the portion of Dover Mills Road that we're working on anyway will have to get upgraded as part of this development, urban standard. Prospect Street, Mrs. Robinson's department has just upgraded that. I'm sure, I haven't gone out and measured it, but I'm sure it meets some form of urban standard because they just rebuilt it. So these things are all considered. That's got to be considered. Yes, it does. But those traffic issues are all going to be the subject of some great long traffic report that's going to appear before you when we bring the draft plan application forward, which is step 2, and we're at step 1. People talked about traffic, entrances. One lady stood up here and kept going on about only one entrance. Well, if you look at our drawing, there's clearly 2 entrances. There's one to Prospect Street and one to Dover Mills Road that are on our drawings that we've submitted, and it's on this drawing right here. So I'll give my pointer is. There's an entrance right there, and there's an entrance right there. She wants to make sure there's 2 entrances. Some of the other speakers said, oh, you can't have an entrance off Prospect because we want houses there, so we only want 1 entrance. We think there should be 2 entrances. That's what we've proposed. The discussion on the park. I saw it too. There's a comment in the planning report that's before you from Community Services that talks about the possibility of cash in lieu of park. I read that. I decided not to make an issue of it tonight. The developer is proposing to provide the full park requirement that meets your current bylaw and the Planning Act, which is 5% of the land, the entire land holding to be given as park. Yes, it's located beside the stormwater pond. Why? Because you have a policy that you approved not that long ago that talks about location of parklands, and one of the ideal locations is beside stormwater ponds so they can be merged together, and the lovely pond is there and the geese are swimming, and it's all very lovely and aesthetic, and it's a good combination of land uses. That's your policy, so we're enforcing that. There's draft plan issues. The townhouses in the wrong spot, right spot, too many houses, not enough houses, too high a density. We're like Milton. Yes, those are issues. When are we going to talk about that? Step 2, draft plan approval. That's when those things are. Many of those issues are actually issues that the Eggings don't want. When they brought their first plan forward, didn't have any townhouses. They wanted all single-family dwellings like their other developments. But policy says variety of housing types, affordable housing, have to have the mix of housing forms, all these things. Townhouses get introduced. Where? It's got to be in the first phase so that they come on stream early. So that's why they're located where they are, but we're going to talk about that more when we get to the draft plan. There was a comment made that clearly the developer is going to develop all of this land because he's planned for it all. He's planned for it all because he has to, because that is what a secondary plan is. He's forced to bring all this stuff before you so we can get it approved, so then he can go back and just focus on his land and make his draft plan application. He is forced to look at all the lands. He is forced to say where these connections are going to be made, where the densities are going to be required. That is what he's forced to do in order to bring this secondary plan forward so you can approve it. I think we've hit the key points. We talked about drainage. Mr. Brunton asked me an excellent question. We talked about diverting the drainage north to the water course, getting it away from the problems that are down on Dover Mills Road to alleviate that. But we heard a lot of comments on drainage. That's our plan, to take the water that's causing those problems and completely get it to a different area. Again, that'll be part of the studies that'll appear before you at the draft plan stage. What we're asking for you tonight are the things that are on that piece of paper. We don't think there's common sense in making this road connection to the Lawrence lands because we don't believe that urban boundary expansion is going to happen, and we don't believe that will ever result, well, not ever, in a long time, in any connection out to Tisdale Road, and that traffic issue is going to have to be addressed some other way through our traffic studies. Maybe Councillor Black has an idea. Maybe that road becomes a one-way or a dead end or something. I don't know, but that's what we'll be bringing forward in our draft plan. So if council has any other questions, it's getting really late. I'm done.
I think it's past your bedtime. The question before I get to Councillor Broughton, one of the questions from one of the speakers was concerning the drainage was a big issue, along with traffic and park and everything. But the report said that we should be able to work out the drainage issues when this land is developed, something of that nature. Is that fair to say that the second step would more address the concerns in the neighborhood of the drainage problems? Mr. Valley, your
Yes,
comment?
you're absolutely
Thank you
correct.
for that answer. Councillor Brunton, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Luke. Very quickly, John, the first request you have is for staff to report back, and number 2 is to deal with Mr. Lawrence's property. Would you consider a 20-meter easement up higher in one of those lot areas? No services, just an easement to address future needs, and forget the piece that's in the urban boundary. Could you live with that?
I think we could live with that, but that even seems more
Remote.
redundant, because you're providing now a block of land that he can't develop, that leads only to land that's outside the urban boundary with very little hope of ever being in the urban boundary. That just seems wasteful, in my opinion. But
I don't disagree with you, but I'm
Yep.
trying to compromise. And I guess my question, I agree with you, but that might be, and unfortunately, I think it's a long ways off, but does it not solve, you said there was $70,000 it cost to put a stub in at the bottom end? If you put it,
well, regardless of where you put it, the
Yeah.
lots are, let's say, on average 35 meters deep, and it costs $2,000 a meter to build the road with the sewers and so on. So
I'm not talking to service the one up top, though. I'm just talking a 20-meter easement, period. No services.
right. So then the only cost to him is the loss of a lot sale. So
Yeah.
so it becomes $100,000 cost.
Well, you said it was 270 on the bottom end?
270, and we came up with that as probably losing 2 lots.
Yep.
Plus the $70,000 to service makes 270.
Right. I don't disagree with you, but I'm trying to look at a compromise on that. And as far as that number 3 item there, I said my piece on that. I just wonder what your thoughts were on doing a complete engineered secondary plan.
Well,
I'm talking where you'd get paid for it, because you mentioned the other side of Dover is going to get it at our expense, and we just prorate the cost back to the 3 owners in the future.
there's merit in that thinking for sure. If I'm the middle owner here, for example, who has come right out at meetings with county staff and said, over our dead bodies will our property ever develop?
He may sell it.
He may sell it. I know they've been approached numerous times, and just doesn't matter what the price is, they're not selling. Makes you wonder why they have a residential urban designation in the official plan, but nonetheless they do. Part of the challenge here is, we could spend a lot of money doing a lot of studies on property that may never ever develop. And by the time it does develop, there'll be different issues and different problems and different scenarios. And will this study that Valley did in 2018 be relevant in 20 years? I don't know.
So you feel that, A, don't do any more engineering studies on those other lands, and that you have accomplished you will have accomplished your secondary plan. That's your feeling?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further, may I have a mover and seconder to close this public meeting? Geisens and Oliver have moved and seconded that we close this public meeting. Discussion? Those in favor? The public meeting is closed. That is carried. Thank you. We have a recommendation from staff on page 160. Does someone wish to move the recommendation or propose any alternatives? Councillor Black.
Well, Mayor Luke, John Valley just gave us a piece of paper, and I don't know if staff had it. I'm wondering what staff have to say about it, whether they would agree to having those 3 recommendations from Mr. Valley included in staff's recommendation, through you to staff.
This piece of
Yes,
paper?
yeah,
Thank
the
you.
bottom.
I've just picked it up. I know it was handed to me. Kayla, yes, I got the right one this time. Kayla, you have seen this?
Through the chair, yes. Planning
And
staff,
some requests, go ahead.
we have had a chance to review the proposal by Valley. In terms of the road stub to the west, the Lawrence lands, planning staff is willing to work with Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Egg Inc. in terms of coming up with an arrangement of how to best